Hello. I'm back again with some more doping research. This time co-authored with an old-time friend, Pavel Popula from Brno Technical University in the Czech Republic. As opposed to most of my previous work, this time it's focused on a very simple problem, and the approach is kind of purely classical mathematical, based on general optimization. This paper is quite new. It was published in European Journal of Sport Studies just a week or two ago. Okay, hope you enjoy it. Yeah, as always, we pick up the presentation parts first. So let's fire up a browser and, as we normally do, search for academia.edu and my name. That should produce this top link, and just click it and wait for the result. Kind of slow today. Internet is failing me. Something happens. There we are. Okay, let's move to conference papers, and there you have it. Just click this and maybe download it. Yeah, why not? Then we move to full screen and have a look at the paper. The title is Why Sports Officials May Choose Not to Fight Performance-Enhancing Drugs, and as mentioned previously, it's written by me and Pavel Popula. And at the bottom here it says where to find it. It's available as well on these socially oriented research platforms if you're interested. Okay. A brief introduction first, then some model assumptions, then a very simple proof, and some comments in the end. What we're interested in here is, in general, doping incentives and demand causalities, which is the top title here. Start by some questions. Could sport itself have incentives for doping? Actually, this is not a new thought. I think I wrote some thoughts about it already in my 2004 paper in Journal of Sports Economics, the performance-enhancing drug game. But in this paper I kind of focus more on technicalities and try to be slightly more formal than I've been before, or we have been before. The second question, how will attendance demand depend on doping prevalence? So we need to establish some causalities here. The third one, how will attendance demand depend on athlete performance? And finally, how will athlete performance depend on doping prevalence? Then further on, could reasonable answers to the above questions, which in a sense is optimization model assumptions, provide an answer to the following question: is the optimal doping prevalence seen from the sport itself positive? Much of my previous work has been related to athlete games, so much of what has been shown in general research on this matter is that there is a kind of huge force driving athletes to use drugs. So in a sense, we have kind of well-known results arguing that doping is something you should expect from the athletes' incentives. So in this paper we kind of look at the sport official incentives, or the sport itself. And if you're able to prove the question at the bottom here, that there is kind of optimal prevalence from the sports side, and if that one is positive, then of course what that means is that sport officials would in a sense like some doping. Not necessarily a lot, but at least a little. And of course, if those who are said kind of put up to punish or reward those who take drugs or do not take drugs, as well as the athletes themselves have strong incentives for taking drugs, then this is a hard problem to solve. Okay, let's look at the formalities. Some model assumptions. We look at, in a sense, a monopoly here. Okay, so there is a demand function here, or actually a partial demand function. This A equals F PD. Of course, we know that attendance demand in sports depends on far more than these two variables, performance and doping prevalence. But in a sense, we focus on the partial demand function here, and we define that function, A, as a function of P and D, and then we assume that the performance depends on how much drugs athletes take. And then there are some crucial assumptions at the bottom here, which need a little bit more explanation, I think. Okay, we assume here that the first partial derivative of this P function, of this A function with regards to performance is positive. That means, in a sense, in practical terms, that audiences enjoy higher jumping, fast running, as well as longer throwing. So this dimensional excellence is something, at least I would expect, would lead to more interest. We see these in general, don't we, that these athletics competitions where all these world record holders are taking place, like you say, Bolt for instance, draws higher attendances. We also know that these athletes are given a very high prize money, several millions of Norwegian crowns actually, just to take part. So it must logically be like that the higher people jumps, the faster they run, the more people are willing to pay to see it. So that is the first assumption. Then there's the second one, which says that the derivative of this small f with regards to doping is negative, meaning that if you, in a sense, increase doping prevalence in a group of athletes, or for that sake in the whole population, we assume that this is to some dislike of the audience. As it says here, if everybody takes drugs, less people will show up at the arenas watching machines or robots, in a sense which doped athletes may be compared to, or in a sense boring. What's interesting here is kind of how you're able to perform based on natural and fair concepts. If you kind of cheat to improve, then we assume, at least in this paper, that less people would be interested in watching. Or to be specific, they'd be less interested in paying so much for watching. And then the final and perhaps most important assumption, this G function, which, as you saw previously here, related to performance to doping, P equals to GOD, is assumed to have a positive derivative. Which means, of course, that the more drugs you inject into a population of athletes, the better they perform. Of course, in general, this is a complex thing. Not always will increasing drug use lead to better performance. We would probably assume that at some point this would kind of flip and go downwards. So if you kind of put too much into it, you don't get the effect. On the other hand, the underlying logical assumption here is, of course, that at that point, dopers will not take any more drugs because they will observe their decreased performance and will stop. So within a practical framework, it seems sensible to assume that this derivative is positive. After all, this is the point of applying PETs, isn't it? And as long as we observe that people take drugs, we kind of must logically deduce that doping use leads to improved performance. Okay, and not so formal proof it says here, so let's do it quite easy. The basic theorem here is the following. We want to prove that the optimization problem given by the maximum of f of PD with respect to decision variables P and D, subject to this constraint where P of performance is linked to amount of drug used by this G function, and assumably positive values for P and D, has an optimal solution D star, which is positive. Actually, the proof is quite simple, at least the idea. We begin by arguing that a certain point A0 equal to 0 must exist. So if this D could be 0, then we are able, in a sense, to find some sports activity which nobody is interested to look at. That's kind of the first point. Any practical sports activity can, for a certain low performance level, have no audience. So we pick that kind of sport. Okay, you can think historically about this. At certain points, certain sports didn't have any willingness to pay, so we can kind of start at that point and at least theoretically think as that as a starting point. Now, let's assume, as we do in point 2 here, that we start increasing D. So we start to put drugs into the sport, and by our assumption of a positive link between performance and doping, at some D point, some audience must be interested, because the performance must have grown, and at some point it's obviously logical that attendance will be drawn. So in a sense, we have found 2 points now. We have found a 0 point of attendance and a positive point of attendance, and consequently, or logically, if you like, the actual optimal attendance must at least be positive, as long as we have a 0 point and a positive point. And that is, in essence, the simple proof. Okay, in the heading here it says many authors have identified stricter sanctions and lower prize money would make a great dope fighting strategy. Me among those to add. So, in a sense, we can think about the paradox. We kind of know how to fight doping, but still we're not able. So why is that? And our main point here is maybe that the fact that a positive doping prevalence exists, in a sense, together with the strong forces driving athletes to take drugs, as well as the sport officials not to fight them, this turns out to be a hard problem to solve. As it says here, the seemingly paradoxical situation with reluctancy both from sports officials as well as WADA in implementing these strategies are suddenly explainable, in the sense that sport officials would perhaps not like a lot of doping, but they would like some doping, especially if not all of this some doping is revealed as doping. Okay. As it says in the second point here, if a certain level of doping provides optimality in attendance or money, if you like, why should sports officials then fight doping, or fight doping very hard, to perhaps be a little bit more precise? There was this case recently where WADA chose not to criminalize dopers, and of course such a strategy may seem logical given the results we have shown here. Okay, so what to do? One obvious thing, which has been discussed for many years by many, is to kind of decouple the financing of WADA from the sports itself. So the International Olympic Committee or the national WADA organizations should not receive their money from sport itself. That's dangerous if sport itself would like to have some drug use. On the other hand, of course, if those who are producing these products are not allowed to govern their own future, that may also impose a problem. Of course, the decision power is the relevant one here, and both sports officials and as well as athletes, at least we could ask questions whether they should be allowed to take or make the decisions they do today. One way of thinking here could be to take WADA out of sports to kind of make it a political type of organization, where politicians outside of sport both finance the organization as well as make decisions. Of course, I don't have all these answers. On the other hand, it's quite obvious that if one really wants to fight doping, letting WADA, financed at least partially by sport itself, make these decisions may turn dangerous. These latter cases in Russia seems in a sense obvious, don't they, given this situation. Okay, that's basically what I had to say today. So as getting old, I should perhaps wish all these young researchers as well as young practitioners the best of luck in fighting drugs in sports.